Okay. Good day, everybody. So, we are dealing with learning addition and subtraction for grade 1 school children. The reason why is that I was busy working with my little grandson, Aryan, and he was getting himself in a bit of a muddle. So, he went off to his mom. So, I thought that I would actually sit and tackle this the best way that I know how, and this is by creating this. I will be posting or sharing the whole presentation on subtraction at a much later stage, but right now we're going to just tackle addition and do it slowly. So let's progress, shall we? So let's start with addition, plus, as we know it. The first thing that we see is the question, and the question reads this: 1 plus 1 is equal to, and there's a little space there, a little box. So we see there's a lot of pictures and so forth to help you understand. The best way is to think of little Annie and her baskets of treats. Okay, as you see, there's little Annie and she's got these 2 baskets. Okay, there are 2 parts to the question, and that is why there are 2 baskets. The baskets are empty and little Annie has to fill them for grandmother. She puts an apple in each basket, as you can see, and grandmother's basket is empty. So little Annie has an apple in each of her baskets, and she starts filling grandmother's empty fruit basket. Now if you switch over to the other little outlined box, you'll find that there are these 2 empty baskets, and there are arrows depicting or showing that these apples have moved over into grandmother's basket. So little Annie has taken the apples and placed it in grandmother's basket. Remember, she had 2 baskets and an apple each in them. So how many apples are there in grandmother's basket now that little Annie's baskets are empty? There are 2 apples in grandmother's basket. Okay, now there's a word there that says basket. Hang on, it's wrong. I'm talking to you. It's apples. Okay, so 1 plus 1 equals 2. When you go on, you'll find that, there are little things that would creep in and creep out. I'm not going to restart it just to correct this. I'm speaking to you. I know what I'm saying, and I know how to correct it as well. Okay, so let's get this straight. So we now know that 1 plus 1 is equal to 2, meaning that 1 apple plus 1 apple is equal to 2 apples. Let's move on. So the same process. Let's start with the question. We see the question. The question reads: 1 plus 2 is equal to, we see an empty box there, meaning that we've got to now figure out and find the answer for it. Again, we see little Annie, and she's got these 2 baskets of hers. Okay, so there are 2 parts to the question and 2 baskets. The baskets are empty, and little Annie has to fill them for grandmother. She puts an apple in one basket, and then she puts 2 apples in the other basket, as you can see from the picture. So little Annie has apples in each of her baskets, and she starts filling grandmother's empty fruit basket. We cross over to the other outlined box, and we can see that there's a shifting again of the apples into grandmother's basket. But if we go back to the question and we look at the baskets, we'll find 1 apple in one basket and 2 apples in the other basket. So little Annie has taken the apples and placed it in grandmother's basket. So now, remember, she had 2 baskets and apples in each of them. So how many apples are there in grandmother's basket? Now that little Annie's baskets are empty, there are 3 apples in grandmother's basket. Now you've seen that I've actually taken out and I've put in the picture to help you better understand. So 1 plus 2 is equal to 3. There are now 3 apples in grandmother's basket. Let's move on, shall we? Again, the whole process. Let's start with addition. The first thing that we see is the question. And the question reads, 1 plus 3 equals, we find this empty box there. We see little Annie and her 2 baskets. And the best way to think of this question is to think of little Annie and her baskets of treats. So there are 2 parts to the question and 2 baskets. The baskets are empty and little Annie has to fill them for grandmother. She puts an apple in one basket and 3 apples in the other basket. So little Annie has apples in each of her baskets, and she starts filling grandmother's empty fruit basket. Again, we find crossing over to the other outlined box. These 2 baskets of little Annie is empty, and grandmother's basket suddenly has fruit in them. And you find that these arrows show that these apples have been shifted over. Now, little Annie has taken the apples and placed it in grandmother's basket. Remember, she had 2 baskets and apples in each of them. How many apples are there in grandmother's basket now that little Annie's baskets are empty? There are 4 apples in grandmother's basket. Again, 1 plus 3 is equal to 4. If you're finding it a little bit strange, let me help you understand again. There are 2 parts to the question. How do you understand that there are 2 parts to the question? Because of the addition sign, the plus, the thing that looks like a cross. That is the separating point in the question, meaning it divides the question. You find that there's one part and there's a second part. 1 plus 3. And that's why there are 2 baskets. The numericals go into the basket, or the numbers go into the basket. The number of objects. Maybe you don't want to use apples. Maybe you want to use oranges. Maybe you want to use soccer balls. Maybe you want to use lipstick. I don't know. But at the end of the day, you will have 2 baskets because you are adding. Even if you are doing a question like 1 plus 0, something that we normally don't do, but you'll find that there's 2 baskets representing the 2 parts to the question. Okay, so let's move on, shall we? So let's start with the question. The first thing we see is again the question, 1 plus 4. We find little Annie, and we think of little Annie and her baskets of treats. Okay, there she is with her empty baskets. So there are 2 parts to the question in 2 baskets. The baskets are empty, and little Annie starts to fill them for grandmother. She puts apples. She puts an apple in one basket and 4 apples in the other basket. as you can see in the picture, but grandmother's basket stands empty. So little Annie has apples in each of her baskets, and she starts filling grandmother's empty fruit basket. Again, we move over to the other outlined box, and we'll find that these baskets now are empty, but grandmother's basket is suddenly full. So little Annie has taken the apples and placed it in grandmother's basket. Remember, she had 2 baskets and apples in each of them. How many apples are there in grandmother's basket now that little Annie's baskets are empty? Okay, so she has 5 apples in grandmother's basket. Concentrate more on me speaking. Okay? Just concentrate more on me speaking to you. If I've done this, it's very strange that I would miss out things. Hence the presentation like this. So there are now 5 apples in grandmother's basket. Let's move on to something a little bit more complex, challenging your mind. You use the same process and you continue. You can go to the next question, which would be, as you start working it out, 1 plus 5, 1 plus 6, 1 plus 7, 1 plus 8, 1 plus 9, 1 plus 10. And you start using the same method, having your 2 baskets, putting in your little apples, and you'll find that you're able to work it out for yourself. But I'm shifting over quickly to something that's a little bit more complex. Okay, so now that we understand how, how to add the number 1 or how to work with the number 1, let's try adding to the number 2. So there's that word that is already missing there. Now that we understand how to add to the number 1, let's try adding to the number 2. I'm not going to correct these words because I'm speaking to you, and I'm just simply going to progress with it. Okay, so let's start with the addition. The first thing we see again is the question. The question reads, it's different, 2 plus 1. Remember, the previous segment was 1 plus 1. Now we are doing 2 plus 1. We see the empty box. We need to put an answer in there. So the best way is to think of little Annie and her 2 baskets of treats. So there are 2 parts to the question and 2 baskets. The baskets are empty and little Annie has to fill them for grandmother. She puts 2 apples in one basket and 1 apple in the other basket. We find that grandmother's fruit basket, which is right there, is empty. Her fruit basket is empty. Of sal ons sê, 'daai mandjie het niks in it. Of in dit. So let's continue. So little Annie has apples in each of elke een van daai mandjies of baskets. And she starts filling grandmother's empty fruit basket. Again, we look at the picture, the little box on the other side. We find those 2 baskets of Annie's, little Annie's baskets, and we see that suddenly there's something in grandmother's basket. You see the arrows that show that there's been a movement. Remember, if you're looking over, you'll find the first basket has 2 apples, which means those 2 apples has suddenly shifted over to grandmother's. In the second basket, we find that there's one apple, and that apple has shifted over into grandmother's basket. We begin to understand that suddenly there are 3 apples in grandmother's basket. What is the question? 2 plus 1? And now we can put an answer. The answer is 3. 2 plus 1 is equal to 3. Ek dink as ek hard probeer, sal ek die hele ding in Afrikaans vir jou wees. Maar I'm going to work with English. Ek sal net met Engels hierdie presentation doen. Okay? So, let's move on, shall we? So let's look at the question. The first thing we see is the question. The question reads, 2 plus 2 is equal to, that box is empty. Little Annie has to put an answer. So there are 2 parts to the question and 2 baskets. The baskets are empty and little Annie has to fill them for grandmother. She puts 2 apples in one basket and 2 apples in the other basket. But grandmother's basket is still empty. We move on to the other block, and we'll find that these 2 baskets suddenly are standing there empty, and you see the arrows show that little Annie has taken those apples from the first basket and the second basket, and she's placed them in grandmother's fruit basket. So there are now 4 apples in grandmother's basket. Remember, little Annie had 2 baskets and apples in each of them. So how many apples are there in grandmother's basket now that little Annie's baskets are empty? Well, 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. You can put an answer in that little box that stands empty. How? You look and you can count the apples for yourself. There are 4 apples in grandmother's basket. 1 apple, 2 apples, 3 apples, 4 apples. So 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. Let's move on, shall we? So, the first thing we see is the question. The question reads, 2 plus 3 is equal to, we find the little empty box. Little Annie has to put an answer in it. We see little Annie standing there and she has her 2 baskets. So there are 2 parts to the question and 2 baskets. The baskets are empty and little Annie has to fill them for grandmother. She puts 2 apples in one basket and 3 apples in the other basket. Grandmother's basket is empty. So little Annie has apples in each of her baskets and she starts filling grandmother's empty fruit basket. We go to the next box. We see again 2 baskets that are empty. These baskets belong to little Annie. Little Annie has taken the apples that were in her baskets and she has now placed them in grandmother's empty basket. You see that the basket is no longer empty, it suddenly has fruit in them. Remember that her baskets had apples in them. So now that they're empty and grandmother's baskets are full, how many apples are there in grandmother's fruit basket? Well, the answer is there, 5. There are 5 apples in grandmother's basket. 2 plus 3 is equal to 5. You look at the question that we started with, 2 plus 3 is equal to, and we needed an answer. This whole process teaches you and how to move and how to break down the question. You're working with two parts to one question. One question, 2 plus 3, has two parts to it before you can find the answer. So 2 plus 3 is equal to 5. Grandmother's fruit basket now has 5 apples in it. Let's move on, shall we? So let's start with this addition again, and the first thing we see is the question. The question reads, 2 plus 4 is equal to, and the little answer box is empty. We see little Annie standing there with her 2 baskets. The best way is to think of little Annie and her baskets of treats. So there are 2 parts to the question and 2 baskets. The baskets are empty and little Annie has to fill them for grandmother. She puts 2 apples in one basket and 4 apples in the other basket. So little Annie has apples in each of her baskets, and she starts filling grandmother's empty fruit basket. You look over to the next box and you find that again, something has happened. Little Annie has been very, very busy. She has taken or emptied her baskets. She has taken the fruit from the first basket, which had 2 apples. She's placed it in grandmother's basket. She has taken the fruit from her second basket and she's placed them in grandmother's fruit basket. So now we find that her baskets are empty. So how many apples are there in grandmother's basket? So let's count, shall we? There are 6 apples in grandmother's basket. The question was 2 plus 4 is equal to, and the answer box is empty. Now we can put in an answer. The answer is 6. 2 plus 4 equals 6. So let's quickly move to the final one. The question we see is 2 plus 5 is equal to. We see the empty answer box. Little Annie has to put an answer in there. We find little Annie and we think of her and her baskets of treats, and she's standing next to her empty baskets. The first thing she needs to do is she needs to fill her baskets. So in the first basket, she takes 2 apples and she puts 2 apples into her first basket. She picks up her second basket and she puts in 5 apples. We look at grandmother's fruit basket. Grandmother's fruit basket has no fruit in it. It's empty. We move over to the next box, and again, we suddenly see that Annie, little Annie, has been very, very busy. She's taken all of her fruit and she's given it to grandmother. She's taken the fruit from the first basket and she's put it in grandmother's fruit basket. She's taken the fruit from her second basket and she's put it in grandmother's fruit basket. So now we ask the question, how many fruit are there in grandmother's basket? Well, if you count them, you'll find that there are 7 fruit, 7 apples in grandmother's basket. Again, don't worry about the little gremlins. You're listening to my voice. So there are 7. If you look at the answer, you'll count. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in grandmother's basket. So 2 plus 5 equals 7. The reason why there is this is because you have to constantly look at the question. You have to constantly look at the 2 parts of the question. You have to constantly check your baskets to make certain that you have the right number of apples in them. You have to look at grandmother's fruit basket to make certain that grandmother, all of the baskets, all of the fruit from your baskets have been transferred over into grandmother's basket. If you've got in your basket 2 apples, if you've got in your second basket 5 apples, if you're looking at the question, you say, hang on, but there are 6 apples there. What have you done with the one? So you go back and you start filling grandmother's empty basket with the right number of apples. The question can't be hard. Matching the question with the fruit can't be hard. You have to have 2 apples in the one basket. You have to have 5 apples in the next basket. You take all of those apples and put it in grandmother's fruit basket, and you will find 2 plus 5 equals 7. Now, if you're looking at the answer with the apples there, you cross them 2, you cross out 1, and you cross out 2. You look at the next part of it, you go to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Your answer will be 7. Which means you've got to constantly look at what you're doing, concentrate hard on the number of apples you have in each basket. You got to make certain that you've transferred every single apple into grandmother's fruit basket in order to make certain that your answer is correct. Why? Because you're still learning. And as you're still learning, you are bound to make mistakes. You've got to make certain that you concentrate hard enough, which means that you've got to keep going back to little Annie. You've got to keep going back to what the question reads. You've got to keep going back and start filling those baskets with the right number of items in order to make certain that all of those items are transferred to grandmother. Grandmother's fruit basket represents the answer. You've got to make certain that you have the right answer, the right number of items in it after you've put them all together. So I trust that you have been able to understand this a lot more clearly. As I said, we will be going back and dealing with subtraction, but that will be in a different presentation apart from this. Children, again, what I love doing with children is taking your counters, taking 2 empty ice cream containers that would represent your baskets. You look at the question, you pick up 2 counters, you pick up 5 counters, and you place them in the 2 different baskets. You then take the 2 baskets or those ice cream containers and tip them over into a 3rd ice cream container or onto your table. And when you put them and you count them, you should find the total or the right answer. 2 plus 5 equals 7. 1 plus 1 equals 2. 1 plus 4 equals 5. And as you progress, you'll find that you will get better and quicker at working out addition questions. When somebody says, what is 1 plus 6? You use the same process, the same method. You can give them an answer. If they ask you 2 plus 6, you use the same method. You can give them an answer. I trust that you enjoyed this, and again, choose what you want to put. If you don't like apples, choose maybe yo-yos. Maybe you want to work with tops Maybe you want to put a little clown's hat or work, have little clown's hats. You don't want grandmother. Maybe you want to give it to mom and dad. Well, choose one of them and put it into their closet. You can take the baskets out and say, well, I like mom's closet. So there stands an empty closet, and you start filling that closet. However you do it, know that this is the process to it, because there are two parts to an addition question. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, you guys. And I know you're going to get bigger and stronger. You certainly are going to get a lot smarter as you progress with this. Be good and start learning hard. Bye, everyone.